So GameMaker Studio 2.3 has been out for about a week and a half now, and I'd say it's going pretty well. I'm pretty happy with it. I've been using it for a while since it was in beta. But as is the case pretty much any time a software with a lot of users has a major update, there are some common questions that people have about it. I've made a ton of videos in the past about the more major features that have been added or changed regarding GameMaker Studio 2.3, but there are also a bunch of simple questions which can be answered in just a minute or two without having to dedicate an entire video to them. I've been paying attention to the Discord and the subreddit and Yo-Yo Games Twitter and to a lesser extent the GameMaker forums, and I put together a list of 10 or so of the most common questions that I've seen people asking. Timestamps to specific questions will be in the video description. If you've been wondering about them, hope this video clears things up. If you have a question that's not included, let me know. I may do more FAQ videos in the future depending on how many other questions people come up with. Let's get started. Do I get to keep my old projects in 2.3? Yes. Should I make a backup of my old projects before importing them into 2.3? Yes. Can I have both GameMaker Studio 2.2 and 2.3 installed at the same time? Kind of. So there are a few ways you can do this. One is simpler and is not guaranteed to work forever. If you log into your Yo-Yo Games account, and if you go to download, you will see that there is GameMaker Studio 2, 1.4 if you own that, GameMaker Studio 2 Beta. If you click on the Beta tab, you still have the option to download the latest beta version, which, as of my recording this, is the same as the official stable version. And then if you want, you can confirm and download the beta installer for either Windows or Mac. And then you can run it, install it. The beta will be installed alongside your main version. It won't uninstall anything, it won't touch the program files, it'll be a separate program. A couple caveats about this. One, I don't know if the beta tab is here for everyone automatically now, or if it's only people who specifically signed up for the beta that will have access to this download. And two, if you go over to the products page, you can see the expiration date is set to the 30th of August 2020, which I believe is going to be like tomorrow as of this video going up, so this may not work anymore after tomorrow. A better way to have both 2.2 and 2.3 installed at the same time would be if you have your Yo-Yo Games account connected to Steam. So if I were to launch this right now, and it's going to take a minute, you can see that this is 2.3. It says IDE version 2.3.0, runtime version 2.3.0 at the top. If I were to open one of these projects, you would see that it's loading into 2.3. We have the asset browser and everything. I can use scripts with classes and that sort of thing. And this would work if I run the game. These are all 2.3 things. And here we have it. Everything is working properly. Now, Steam also lets you have any version of a program installed. Any version of a program in your library. Almost. Within reason. So if you right-click the item in your library, you go to Properties, go to the Betas tab. By default, the beta setting is none opt out of all beta programs, but if you want, you can have Steam freeze on me. Thank you. Please don't freeze on me when I'm trying to record a video. If you click on the drop-down, you can see a list of past versions, 2.1.4 through 2.2.5. You can't go back beyond 2.1.4 because I believe that was when the GDPR law happened and Yo-Yo Games had to emergency change things with like their user agreement and whatever. Anyway, you can set that to 2.2.5 and it will download the old program files. You will need to have your main version of GameMaker closed in order for it to be able to do this, but it'll take a moment. And then when you go back to your library, you'll see that it specifies 2.2.5 in your library, and when you launch it, it will now launch it into the old version. And again, this is going to take a minute. And I have to log in again. And when it finally lets you log in, you can see it is running IDE version 2.2.5. Runtime is still 2.3. You will need to change that if you go into... Where is it? Preferences, runtime feeds. If you go to beta, there is a list of beta runtimes. If you go to master, there is a list of master runtimes. 2.3 is currently the main one. 2.2.5 is available. I have it on my computer, just not loaded. And you can change your runtime to that. GameMaker is going to want to restart. And you can see it has switched the runtime over. So most of these projects here I have will not work because there are projects for 2.3 and 2.2 will reject them. If I can find an older one, I believe this is an old project that has not been 2.3ized yet. So you can load an old project. You can't load new projects, obviously. And once it does that, everything will be back to the way it was for a long time. You have instead of the asset browser, you have the resource tree with dedicated resource folders. If you were to run this, it would run. This is a stopwatch. I forget why I made this. The number's going up. There's no way to stop it. Anyway, will the Steam version install independently of the not Steam version? Okay, here we go. This is the 2.3 IDE, but I do have to manually switch the runtime back. You can see in the corner it says I'm still on the old runtime.
Hey.
It's the same deal. If you go to Preferences, Runtime Feeds, Master, you can switch it over, and that will cause the IDE to restart. This is kind of like massive weirdness. If you have two instances of GameMaker open at once, they can have separate versions of runtimes in use. I'm going to let this load, and I'm going to open up Emu, and I'm going to run this, and it will work as expected using the 2.3 runtime. This program window over here still is on 2.2.5, and if I were to run this, it would still work because the runtime is loaded. But if I were to close the version of GameMaker that is running through Steam and restart it, the runtime would be automatically switched back. Hence why I said you can kind of have both versions of GameMaker installed at the same time. It's a little bit weird. I am going to switch that back to the new version because now that we have all the 2.3 things, I'm not especially interested in going back a version. Can you still manually order your resources in the asset browser? So one of the several things that 2.3 has added that I've wanted in GameMaker Studio 2 for a long time has been the ability to automatically alphabetize resources in the resource tree. And it's finally here in 2.3, as many people have noticed, and I am honestly very surprised that as many people as there is not a fan of this change, or not a fan of this change. So in the old version, the order in which resources would be listed in the asset browser would be it would be whatever you set it to. There was no automatic sorting by name or by date or by anything like that. If you wanted things to be in a particular order, you had to put them there yourself. And 2.3 changes that by default to alphabetical sorting. So I no longer have the ability to rearrange these things. My assets that start with like obj underscore will automatically be on top of the list. Or at least above the assets that start with SPR underscore or anything like that. And you can see overall they're sorted in alphabetical order. As I've said, I'm very surprised by the number of people who don't want this and want it to go back. So there's a filter button here at the top of the asset browser. And you can set the sorting from A to Z to A to custom order, which will just let you drag things around any way you want. Like was the case before, you could put like obj at the bottom or in the middle or whatever you want. If you have multiple folders in something, you have the ability to, if they're sorted by name, either in alphabetical or reverse alphabetical order, to put the folders at the top, the way you would find them in something like Windows Explorer. I generally like that to be the case. And then there's other things you can do with the asset browser, like only show fonts or only show scripts, or show scripts and also show shaders or something like that. And you have other ways that you can filter the asset browser tree, and it's quite nice. Now, I will say, one of the more common reasons that people want to be able to manually sort things in the asset browser is because they have code which depends on things in the asset browser being sorted in a certain order. For example, if you have hard-coded an object index into your game somewhere, for example, saying something like instance create depth at a x, a y, and a z, and instead of saying like obj whatever, using the resource name, some people would instead go straight to the assets index and say like instance create depth at the position, whatever object has index 0. Or perhaps you're creating a save file for your game and you're saving the object index or the sprite index of something to a file and loading it in later. Don't do that. That has never been a good idea. GameMaker has always let you do it. It has never been a good idea for exactly the reason that people are seeing now. The exact index of an asset in the asset browser or in the resource tree is not guaranteed. Some versions like GameMaker 7 or 8 would assign them one way. Other versions like Studio 1 or 2 would assign them in other ways, and they're not guaranteed to be the same. And if you're hard-coding asset indices, that's a recipe for disaster. So if you just prefer that your asset browser is sorted in a particular way that you decide and you want to turn off alphabetical sorting, that's fine. If you don't want your asset browser to be alphabetized because it's breaking your game logic, then you should probably deal with the problems in your game logic before you deal with the problems in the asset browser. How do you do included files now? So this is a change that I did not actually expect when 2.3 happened, and now that the change is here, I really like it. This is honestly how included files should have worked from the beginning, but that's neither here nor there. So in previous versions of GameMaker, if you wanted to add a data file that you could load during the game's runtime, you would have had to have gone to the included files resource type, and then you would have had to right-click, add included file from some other file on your computer. Or alternatively, in most cases, you could also drag and drop the file onto the IDE window. And if you look at the resource tree in 2.3, that is no longer there. There is no such thing as an included file resource anymore. If you were to take something like a sprite and just like drag it and drop it onto the IDE, it would instead just add as a literal sprite without asking you if you want to include it or anything like that. You may notice if you come over to the menu, to the hamburger menu, in the upper right of the asset browser, there are a few things. There's the room manager, the config editor, game options, and included files. And included files will open up this. And you may wish to try dragging and dropping a file from the like Windows Explorer or something into this included files dialog, and that won't do anything. And to be honest, it probably should do something. You probably should be able to add included files by doing that action. But instead what you can do is click Open in Explorer. It will open a Windows Explorer window, and it will be open to the inside of the data files folder. And I don't think this is really explained all that well. I think Yo-Yo Games could be a little bit more clear about explaining this change. I found it by accident back when the beta came out in last April.
Hey.
But instead of let's see, where was the thing? Instead of having to do anything through the IDE, you can now instead just like copy. Let us copy and Control-V paste files into the included files folder directly. And lo and behold, they are now included in your project. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to go out of your way to do anything to add them. You can just copy and paste folders into the data files. You can just copy and paste files or folders into the data files folder, and they'll just magically appear. And that is really nice. That is really how it should have worked from the beginning, and I'm glad that they finally changed it to do that. Other game engines, if you were to just copy and paste resources into like the Unity assets folder, they would automatically be there. I believe if you were to copy and paste sprites or character sheets or whatever into RPG Maker, they would automatically be included as well. If you didn't know that before, now you do, and I hope it makes your life easier, because it certainly made my life easier. When should I use structs? This question doesn't have an answer. This is pretty much entirely up to you. This is dependent on how you like to work and how you like to make your games and how you like to organize your code. I use structs for pretty much everything. Anything that would have been a DS map in the past for me is now a struct, or almost anything anyway. There's a few exceptions. Anything that would have been a GameMaker instance in the past is now a struct, except for a couple individual things that I have yet to convert over. I like structs. I like using the dot operator, I like using methods, I like using static members. I like the fact that they're garbage collected with a big asterisk on that. automatically without having to manually destroy them. That doesn't necessarily mean structs are a hard and fast thing that you have to use, or that there's a correct place to use them. Like everything else in game dev, structs are a tool. There are times when you can use them, there are times when using them would probably make your life easier. There are times when you can use them, but it wouldn't necessarily make your life easier, but you can do them anyway because you're me and you're weird and you just like using structs for everything. You can also not do any of that. You can also keep using DS maps, you can keep using GameMaker instances. No one can tell you that you shouldn't do that, and if someone does tell you that you shouldn't do that, you probably shouldn't listen to them, because being judgy about other people's code is just what programmers do for fun in their free time. Use them whenever you want. What is the self keyword? What is it for? So in previous versions of GameMaker, there is a keyword called self. And in previous versions, it was effectively worse than useless. It would, in a lot of cases, actually not do what you thought it did, and a lot of errors could be traced back to people using the self keyword when they shouldn't be, which is pretty much all the time. That has changed now. The behavior of self is somewhat different depending on what you're doing if you're using a struct. So in previous versions, self, the keyword, was just essentially a macro for -1. And the purpose was to refer back to the instance that was currently running the code. That is not necessarily the case anymore. If I were to run this now, you would see that instead of printing out a value, show message of self would print out nothing at all, an empty string. And that is because the function of self has changed. Instead of referring to the calling instance, it now refers to the struct. And that sounds like a minor difference, but it does, well, one, it works correctly now instead of whatever it did before. And two, so let's create a struct. We will say function a struct no equals, and we'll pass it some parameters. Let's just give it the parameter. Let's say data. Mark it as a constructor. And we can create an instance of that struct. And let's give the data a value of 10. Var the struct equals no a struct. I guess we're playing with like definite and indefinite articles now. You may wish to get the value that was passed to the struct as a parameter by way of show message the struct. And the way you might want to get to that value might be the dot operator, because data should be a variable that belongs to that struct. And we're going to see that this isn't actually going to work. Variable data not set before reading it. You've probably seen that error before. That just means the variable doesn't exist. And that is because data has, it's essentially a local variable. It is passed as a parameter to a function, and it evaporates into thin air once you are done running that function, or in this case, running the constructor. So you may wish to save that to a local variable. And you may wish to do something like data equals data. That's not going to work either. As you will see, we get the exact same error message, and that is because, once again, data is a local variable, and you're just reassigning it to itself, which is honestly pretty meaningless. So if you've ever used another object-oriented language like Java, /script, or C# or something like that, I'm pretty sure Python has a equivalent. You are probably familiar with something along the lines of the this keyword, which is used to refer back to the instance of the struct that is, of the instance or struct or whatever that's running the code.
Hey.
And that's essentially what self is now. GameMaker chose to call it self. That's kind of a holdover from like many versions of GML ago, from like 15 years ago. They just decided to call it self instead of this. So now if you were to do this, self.data equals data, you can see, as hinted by the syntax highlighting, self is no longer a local variable, but an instance variable. And when we run the code, instead of crashing, the game does indeed show us the value of 10, which is what we passed in, and which is what we want.
Hey.
So self just, it essentially overrides the fact that a variable has been marked as local, either as a function parameter or using the actual var keyword. What's the deal with arrays? So arrays in GameMaker for the longest time looked something like, you would say array index, let's make it something exciting like index 1 equals a value. And then you could access the elements in the array with the square brackets. So show message array of index 1. And when I run the game, that is going to show a message box containing the string pi. kind you eat, not the one that relates to trigonometry. That's a 1D array. Those haven't changed. They also used to have 2D arrays, which you would define with something like array of index, let's say 4 and 3 equals. Let's just say that's even more pi, and you could also show message that in much the same way. Array 2D, index 4, 3. And we're going to run the game, and we're going to see pi and even more pi. Can you tell I would kind of like to eat some right now? And there you have it. This still works, clearly, because it just worked, but it's not really encouraged anymore. Arrays, there's really, inside the computer, there's no such thing as a 2D array. There are 1D arrays of 1D arrays, which you can combine to get a 2-dimensional array. Really, the more correct way to do that now would be array 2D index 4, index 3. And that will, GameMaker will automatically turn 4, 3 into the chained accessor notation. Array index 4, index 3. As you see, it does the same thing. If you've been using 2D arrays, that is probably a habit you should get into at some point. I doubt they're going to remove the old 2D array notation with a comma any day soon, but in case they do, you probably want to be used to quote-unquote correct notation. And if you use other programming languages, it is much more common to see the 1D arrays of 1D arrays instead of the 2D arrays. And that also makes it more intuitive to chain arrays of any dimension you want, if you want to go even farther. By the way, in case you are wondering, if you were to run this, let me get rid of the first show message to get it out of the way. If you were to run this without using the entire square bracket that is over here, 4370, that would still work. You would just be printing out a 1D array of a 1D array containing strings instead of the exact string. That's how arrays work now. The old array length, array height functions are still there, and you can still see that they are recognized by the IDE. But you can see by the fact that they turn blue over here, these are deprecated. They will still work in your code if you have them in your code still, but they are not really advisable to be used. You can still get them to get the dimensions of an array. Instead, there is simply array length, which will get the dimension of any array, which may contain either values or other arrays. So that's how arrays work now. What is static? So this is a common question that I have actually already done a video on. Instead of repeating myself, I'm just going to point to that video. So there's going to be a card popping out of the corner of this video now, or a link in the video description. You should all go watch it. I updated it to GameMaker Studio 2.3, and now my project won't build, and then my computer exploded, and then my house burned down. Everything sucks, I hate yo-yo games. Yeah, that's the extent of my dramatic voice acting abilities. So, I've seen a lot of people reporting problems getting their old projects to work in GameMaker Studio 2. I will always tell people that I imported a 40,000 line project and a 75,000 line project into GameMaker Studio 2.3, and they were both working within 20 minutes. I've been writing code for a long time in a lot of different programming languages, and it's entirely possible that the code that Yo-Yo Games expected to have to convert from 2.2 to 2.3 just happens to be very similar to the code that I actually write, which is why I didn't really have any issues. I also don't really do a lot of things involving rooms in a lot of the other GameMaker systems, which cuts down on the number of places that things can go wrong. But honestly, guys, let's try to exercise a little bit of deductive reasoning here before we go complaining on every single public forum on the internet that GameMaker Studio 2.3 is broken and a sham or whatever. There's a number of things you can do. One, look at the actual error messages that you're getting. That can be in the form of a runtime error that have been popping up all videos. I've been demonstrating things that don't work. That could be in the form of the console output down here when things go wrong, which is where runtime errors go after you close the game anyway. That could be over here in the compile errors log if you try to like switch a non-constant value or something like that. It could be over here in the syntax errors log, which is if you were to try and just write code that isn't code. Sometimes unexpected things happen. When there are major updates to software, a lot of unexpected things will happen. But honestly, a big part of game dev is figuring out why your game isn't doing what you think it's doing. And there are a few places that are a better example of that than when your game fails to build. And in most cases, it tells you why it fails to build. Last question for today. How does Sean Spalding's collision code work? Just because I make 3D games in GameMaker doesn't mean I specialize in impossible cases, okay? Special thanks to Edward Holt, Indie Punch, and Zenith for supporting these videos. If you want your name in the credits and to force me to pronounce them out loud at the end of every video, head over to the Patreon page in the video description and join the fun.